Welcome to In the Gutter, a podcast that is all comics, all bangers, all the time, with story expert Lonnie Diane Rich and superhero scholar Joshua Unruh. One of the hosts has read almost no superhero comics, and the other has read almost all of them. We'll let you sort out which is which. And now, In the Gutter.
Okay, I have a musical realization that I made just this week.
Yeah.
And it is going to date the living shit out of us. So whatever episode it was where we were having people drink when we accidentally dated ourselves,
yes,
you can either drink nothing, because I'm not doing this by accident, or you need to line up shots starting here and ending here. So here we go. So I listened to a Slate podcast about pop charts that I find absolutely fascinating 80% of the time. And the joy of podcasts is if I'm like, I don't give a shit about that, I can just keep listening, move on. I don't have to listen to that episode. And so it's called Hit Parade. So this week's episode was about Hootie and the Blowfish. All right. So already dating the shit out of myself. But what I found super fascinating was that they were talking about how, like, that's like 93, I think, 94, something like that, is when Cracked Rear View and it's certified like 100 times platinum now. Like, it's ridiculous, you know. But that they were talking about how it's just this weird coincidence that, and this is a phrase I'm borrowing from the podcast, that jangly guitar Americana became hot shit for just a minute, long enough. You know, but you can see it in other stuff like Nirvana's follow-up around that time was very different, you know. Blues Traveler shows up, like, just, you know, lots of nobody hits the heights. Well, I mean, you know, Nirvana hit its own heights, but, you know, with that kind of sound, nobody hit those heights like Hootie and the Blowfish. And I had this realization where I was like, Cracked Rear View is to us what Frampton Comes Alive was to, like, my parents.
Right.
So Frampton Comes Alive and Cracked Rear View are both albums that fucking everybody had, and if they say they didn't, they're a liar. But also we all pretend like we didn't have them now. And I looked around my office at the 20-somethings that I work with, and I was like, this observation is not for these people. They don't know who Hootie and the Blowfish is. They don't know who Peter Frampton is. So yeah, but please react to my thought process there. What how do you feel about that? Does that seem right to you? Cracked Rear View, the Frampton Comes Alive of our generation.
Well, now you're going to force me to come out as a person who knows absolutely nothing about music. Like, I'm vaguely familiar with Frampton. I do remember Hootie and the Blowfish. I did not own Cracked Rear View, but I did have a lot of Counting Crows. I had August and everything after. No, like, I'm serious. I didn't.
What a choice between. But, okay, so Frampton Comes
Crows.
Alive.
I had, like, yes,
is so famous for its ubiquity that they made a joke about it in the Wayne's World movie. So again, dating the shit out of myself. Have another shot. Where
give me a song from it.
It's a live album. Like, it's like
it's a live album.
Yeah, that's why it's called Frampton Comes
like
Alive.
Oh Baby I Love the Way? Was Frampton Oh Baby I Love Your Way? Okay, so I do know who Frampton is.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know anything about music, so music doesn't date me the way that, like, discussion of TV shows dates me.
Oh, fair. Okay. All right. Yeah.
When
they made a joke about how they issued
fucking dates me. Yeah.
Frampton Comes Alive with like you could send in proofs of purchase with laundry detergent to get it. Like, that's the Wayne's World joke, something like that. Like, that's how ubiquitous it was. My mom has a copy that my dad pretends we don't own. Like, I mean, it's and I say we because this has
album.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, I came into a house of vinyl, friends. You know, yeah.
But you still have it?
Oh, my dad does. I don't have
all my vinyl's gone.
They have their vinyl. I never had. Well, I had like 45s. You know, I didn't buy like whole albums because cassettes were a thing by the time I was, you know, like buying music.
Right.
But I'm familiar with vinyl. Oh no, when I was like 5 or 6, I was the needle dropper. Like, they would tell me to go drop a needle because I could find a song. I don't remember this. I was 5. But apparently I was incredible at it. So, and now what a useless skill. What a skill that will never be used again.
And all the youngsters are like, what's the needle? What's that about? Right?
So
What are you
vinyl
dropping the
and
needle
needles
on?
and turntables are what DJs use now to
Yeah.
make music. But we used to only use them to play
That
music.
was what we had. Yeah.
That's what we had.
Oh God.
That's right.
That's pretty
Yeah.
cool.
So that was
Well,
the
I love,
deal.
yeah.
So
It's yet one more space where I know nothing, and you can educate me on the history of what's going on here. I mean, like
Oh.
I remember vinyl, but like I'm terrible with music. Like I like music. Like I'm not, a Philistine or anything, right? I like music and I listen to it, but it's just not like the kind of thing that I go to the way I go to TV. Now, if you want to talk about Moonlighting, Scarecrow and Mrs. King,
yeah.
I
can.
Hawaii Five-0 original. Like I just saw that they were remaking Magnum PI, and I was like, "Are you kidding me? They're doing a remake."
Yeah,
of
that dude doesn't
absolutely
even
everything
have a
in the 80s.
mustache. What the fuck? Like, why are you even
I
bothering?
don't even know what the hell that's about. Like,
Honestly.
get out of the space. It just doesn't work. So anyway, yes, that is where I age myself in those references. But I do appreciate, like your musical association, and of course, like a shout out to Hit Parade, a podcast that you can absolutely predict that I have never listened to, because is it terrible? Like, am I going to get hate mail? I don't really care that much about music. Like, I like it.
Oh, so no. Okay.
But I'm not like deeply invested in knowing music and music history.
Okay, I don't know that I'm really deep. I have particular genres and artists and stuff that I absolutely love. Like music is like real, very much a part of like my sort of mental real estate.
Yeah.
But what I think is fascinating to me about Hit Parade, what that does to me is it is such a confluence of like popular opinion and money and pop culture and trends. And when weird shit happens, like jangly guitar Americana taking over from fucking grunge, I am curious. Right? Like that kind of thing. So the like random, the ones that are just sort of like, here is the history of a movement. Like sometimes that's interesting. Or when they follow like all of Madonna's career, because that's like 4 careers for anybody else. Right?
Sure.
That stuff's interesting. But what I really like is this kind of thing where it's like, hey, here's a band that was the top of the fucking world for 5 minutes. And here's how that A happened and B stopped happening. Through no fault of their
Darius,
own. Yeah.
Hey, listen to me though. Listen to me drop a name. Darius Rucker, right? Wasn't that the singer from Hootie and the Blowfish? Doesn't he have like a career as like a country music star now?
That's actually the background so the first part of this was all about the sort of rise of Hootie, but the background sort of radiation of this is Rucker finding his next career, right? Like after Hootie and the Blowfish, because the guy's got a really like impressive voice. Like it's just really rich and warm and and that apparently again, I haven't heard part 2. I can't wait, but apparently he almost landed on his feet a couple of times and now is like a country and western singer, which I find really depressing because I love country music from about 1988 and before. And then there's like a brief sliver of things that I'm interested in from high school because nobody was listening to the music that I was listening to. So if I wanted to pick up girls, that's what was up. Had to know some country. But overall, I'm like, modern country's hot garbage. Yes, I don't have a Twitter to @ me anymore. So just come find me wherever you can if you have an argument about that. But so I'm sorry. I mean, I'm kind of upset that like that's where Rucker landed because I'm not going to give a shit. And I'm kind of sad about it because now I've been reminded that
I liked him.
That I spun the shit out of Hootie despite the fact that everything else in my collection was like Dr. Dre, Tupac, Biggie, Wu-Tang, So. And
I
not for
lack
nothing.
an opinion on all of this. Yeah.
Yeah, I still owe you a P-Funk playlist, don't I know it? But the place that this comes together for me is that the looking at the weird trends and how they affect the pop charts is not dissimilar to looking at like what's hot and what's not over the course of like superhero comics. Like legitimately, that's these are not disassociated for me. Like I care more about comics than I do about music, honestly, but there's more data on the music, so I get like all wrapped up in the in the nerdery. But it's the same thing as this, where it was like, hey, let's revive a JLA people are going to give a shit about. And no, I mean, honestly, like that was the deal. That was the let's get a big up and comer, whose name is really, is going to be interesting. It's going to be a weird pull for superhero stuff. Let's get that guy, give him a pure superhero artist, and let them have the biggest characters in DC. And that lightning strikes and turns me into a huge DC and Grant Morrison fan. Like both of those things happen from this one book. It's not dissimilar to, out of nowhere, apparently we're listening to Hootie and the Blowfish. I feel like those are connected personally.
I think that they absolutely are, and trends affect everything that is part of pop culture. So I absolutely love that. I think that is a fabulous transition into the issue that we're talking about today, which is a continuation of last week's issue, Fire in the Sky. So I'm going to go ahead and do the summary again, as best I can, considering that most of the time I have no idea what's going on. In Heaven on Earth, we see San Francisco being torn apart by Asmodel under the Captain Obvious narration panel saying, "Not all angels are good angels." Cool. As Superman tries to prevent the moon from falling into the Earth, Asmodel demands that Zariel show his sorry face or he's going to lay waste to San Francisco, which seems like something he's kind of already done, but whatever. Zariel shows up with the whole JLA at his back and says, "Not today, asshole." That is not an actual translation, that's a paraphrase. Meanwhile, the demons are pissed because their little moon toy isn't pulling the moon to the Earth anymore. Something is resisting. Yeah, that's Superman, mofos. Get used to it. Meanwhile, Wally the Flash West is stuck in the transporter, flickering back and forth between the moon and San Francisco, wondering who wanted him and Superman out of the way. Back on Earth, the JLA are trying to take on Asmodel and the Bad Angels, and Zariel thinks they may be able to get Superman down here to help if they can disable the signal holding him at bay in Asmodel's chariot. Green Lantern and Aquaman stay behind to keep Asmodel busy. Meanwhile, at the hospital, the man who was formerly in a coma wakes up and heads out, leaving patients and staff behaving in very disturbed ways as he escapes. We will definitely talk about that later. And speaking of disturbed, Wonder Woman goes to Asmodel's chariot and disrupts the disrupting signal, getting both Flash and Superman to Earth while being sexually harassed by an angel. So just another Tuesday for Wonder Woman, I'm guessing. Superman fights Asmodel, somehow able to stand up to the light of heaven, which only the purest of souls can withstand, while Wonder Woman tries to keep Asmodel's falling chariot from destroying San Francisco. On the ground, Green Lantern imagines up a device that can cancel out the angel's supersonic vibrations, taking them all out, and suddenly, battle's over. In the aftermath of their victory, Superman offers a space in the JLA to Zariel, which Zariel declines. He'll stay for the cleanup, but he's got some mortal business to attend to, which appears to be heading to a woman's house to tell her that even though she does not know who he is, he's in love with her. And now we've got City of Angels happening there, I guess. Meanwhile, the demons are pissed. They didn't get the moon, but Neron says they've got a better game to play. Damnation. In the epilogue, the JLA is bringing Green Arrow onto the team when they are interrupted by some dude in black. I'm guessing it's Coma Guy? Maybe Josh should have done the summary.
No. You got it. Right. All of it. Even your guesses are pretty good guesses.
Yeah. Is that okay, good. Because I really had no idea what was going on. All right, so here we are. Now I've done the summary. And once again...
It's just the constant refrain. In the gutters, Lonnie thinks she doesn't know what's going on, actually doing just fine.
All of it is so wild and out there. And as I'm reading it, a lot of the times I'm like, I'm taking a guess, but I'm not 100% sure that this is actually what's happening here. I'm interested. Like, here's the thing with JLA. I got to tell you, I've never been bored. I'm never bored. I'm often confused, but never bored. So for this issue, go ahead. Give me your general response to this issue.
Oh, I mean, I love it. It all works for me, but I'm already tuned into this frequency. Ha ha ha. More on that as we go. We'll talk about it. But I'm tuned in on this, right? I'm all the way in on Morrison, and Porter's art is great. We'll talk a little more about that in a minute. I think though that all of us who are big Morrison fans can admit that there are times when a 2-parter feels like it should have been a 3-parter, or a 3 a 4 or a 4 a 6 or something like that. I mean, I can, even the ones that I really love of their stories, sometimes there's a feeling that like it's sort of picked up so much momentum that it doesn't fall down, but it trips over its feet a few times on the way. You know, like it's all there, right, but it's all happening in 10 pages when 20 would have been better, or something like that. I don't know that I necessarily think that's this story necessarily, but like that's a vibe. Like I can get that feeling in general with Morrison superhero stuff, even if I don't necessarily land on it here. You know.
Yeah, it was a bit much for me. Like, it does feel to me like too much story packed in too small a suitcase. I don't dislike it, but I feel like I need more breathing room to get what's happening. And I'm really like, honestly, like I'm really responding to like the Superman vulnerability we've had sort of going on. That, you know, here he is, he's kind of in the middle of this identity switch, which may or may not be something that they really want to deal with. But it's interesting. I'm into it, but I'm also really confused and not really sure exactly what the hell is happening. Like, at any point.
Okay, well, let's dive into this art, because I feel like you know what's going on, but we'll pull apart the story after we chat art to make damn sure you know what's going on. Jack, give us some let's talk about the art music.
All right, so starting with the cover art, which is what we like to do, we have this like really dynamic shot, right? In the skies above the Golden Gate Bridge, we have John, who looks to be hitching a ride with Zariel into an angel battle. I think that's what's happening, but it also feels a little bit like Zariel, like maybe he's pulling Zariel down, because we have Zariel in this like downward motion where he's holding out his sword, but there's some kind of flaming projectile coming at his face. It's cool, it's beautiful, it's interesting, but I don't know what's happening.
Well, you know, speaking for myself, I have no notes. I don't need to know what's happening. I just need to know shit is happening. I mean, you know, it's like these two guys. They're brand new bros getting into a little dust up with one of their old sets of bros. You know. It's just like, that's it. That's what's up. I will say, even for most superhero stuff, the angle, like that downward angle, is so extreme. Porter's art is so much more fluid than Kirby's, but Jack Kirby his style is more was more blocky, but he was very known for these like really extreme angles and like hand way in the foreground, you know, kind of thing. And this reminds me of that. Like the style is so different, but the composition is so Kirby that you know, there's not a whole lot I can say about an artist that's nicer than, hey, you make me think of the King, so good job, you know. But that's, so I guess I'm just less concerned in what's going on and more just in love with this, you know, with this layout, this page layout. So.
Right. No, it's really incredibly beautiful. It's very cool. Of course, we've got like the angel feathers that are flying all over the place. There's just lots of stuff going on. It's got an incredible movement. It almost feels circular when you see the wings sort of splayed out.
Yeah.
It's very, very cool, and I like it. But again, like I like to know what's happening. Maybe that's just a personality flaw of mine, but I like to know what's happening, and sometimes I can't get it. I do have to say though, like in the interior art, there is a lot of stuff that I'm not really sure about, that I'm not really sure what's happening. But Porter is amazing. Like every page is so interesting, so dynamic, so much stuff going on. And the work that he does with all of this stuff happening, I think is pretty incredible. So I just have to say, like, he's amazing.
Yeah, and since Porter's responsible for both the covers and the interiors, I can kind of transition from one to the other. One, I get you on the I'd like to know what was going on. At the same time, let's remember what covers' jobs actually are, which is to get you to pick it up in the first place. So we
Right.
don't want to give away the farm. We would rather, I think, be a little confusing or strange or weird. I mean, the most kind of ridiculous historical example of this is that gorillas became a big deal at DC because they realized they moved 20% more units when they put a gorilla on the cover. I mean,
Well,
you know,
everything's yeah.
so
Everything's a function of capitalism, so sure.
well, yeah, but again,
Yeah,
this is
yeah.
a little bit about the pop chart thing, like the trends and stuff. Like it's
Right.
weird, but just in defense of the whole story not being clear on the cover, that's not really the cover's job. The cover's job is to get you to go, wait,
Right.
what the hell? And you know, here it is
Yeah.
working on you. So looking at the interiors of this book, the last couple issues and this one, I was reminded of MTV's Pimp My Ride. Another dating myself reference, because it feels like we're pimping our comic book. Hey, like, I heard you like porter, so I put some porter in your porter so you could porter while portering. Like, that's what this art is, and I love it. Again, no notes.
It's great. It's great. I gotta see. All right, so let's get started talking about the story, and let's start with Superman. What do you have to educate me on with Superman?
Well, I don't know about education per se, but I was a person who was very skeptical of Superman being blue at this time. Like it just,
Right.
I was skeptical of the whole thing. I wasn't really reading Superman books because I wasn't really reading DC. And as listener Matt Liparata reminded me, I was not alone. Like there were a lot of people very skeptical about this because it was like kind of out of nowhere as a power shift. And everybody was like, oh, we got to make Superman less powerful, which is kind of bonkers because this was not a wildly overpowered era for Superman. In fact, the thing I want to bring up here is he stops the moon from falling with science. With the use of his new powers. He would not have been strong enough at the time, at the era that this was being written, he would not have been strong enough to just push the fucking moon back into orbit. Like at the time, there are absolutely moments in DC history where he would have been. Like I've got a panel of Superboy in mind right now where he's dragging dozens of literal planets on huge chains. Okay, so like, but that was not this time. So, like, regular flavor Superman could not have put the moon back. But skeptical blue electric Superman is like, oh yeah, fuck you, I know a little science. Let's mess with magnetic fields and show your ass. And it's great. It's great.
It is great. I love that moment, right? I love that moment with Superman. I am almost afraid to bring up the overpowered discussion that we've had in the past in which I have asserted that there are certain characters. This was back in Listen Up A-Holes with the Marvel Universe that were overpowered. And you said there's no such thing as overpowered.
That's not a thing in superhero comics.
It's not a thing in superhero comics. I will argue that it's a thing in storytelling and that having characters that are overpowered does present problems in storytelling. And comics are part of storytelling, but that is an argument we've had before. Neither one of us is going to budge. But here's the thing. If in this, the blue Superman was an attempt to make Superman less like all powerful, as you say, or as I might say, overpowered, then is that something within the DC comics that they were realizing that he had too much power?
You have a confluence of several things going on there.
Okay.
I was not prepared for this, so buckle up. Let's see how I do. There's a couple of things. One of those things is that I'm going to reference Chris Sims, a comic book essayist and podcaster that I've been a big fan of for a long time. And they wrote, I may be able to find it for the show notes, but maybe not, for reasons that aren't interesting enough to go into it. This was on a website that's largely defunct now. But they did an article where they talked about how DC is always, to a certain extent, dealing with the problem. Capital T, capital P. Okay? And the DC problem is it wants to be Marvel. So DC rules the fucking world, selling to 6 to 10-year-olds for a thin dime for decades, and then they fall out of favor again. It's funny. Cultural trends, like largely because of the House Un-American Activities Committee and the way that it focused on childhood delinquency in extremely stupid fucking ways, and the reliance on a text by I forget his first name, Dr. Worthams, like a child psychologist. It was called Seduction of the Innocent, and he was like, "Look at all of these delinquents. You know what they have in common? They all read comics, except motherfucker, it was 1940. Every kid read comics. There was not one kid." So the Venn diagram of kids and comics was a fucking circle. So the diagram of delinquents who also read comics, also a fucking circle, but different than the first circles, right? Anyway, so they fall out of popularity. Marvel shows up, and their big claim to fame, their big like advancement of the technology is these stories are for young adults. They wouldn't have said YA fiction at the time because it wasn't really a genre, but that's 100% what they were doing. They moved it from 10-year-olds to 13-year-olds, and it happened to catch on with people in college, and the rest is history. And after that moment, so like really from the 60s to the 80s, DC has a problem, and they can't figure out how to fix it because they're getting outsold left, right, and center by these new Marvel comics. And this is where they develop the problem where they want to be Marvel. Crisis on Infinite Earths happens, which does a whole bunch of stuff that we cannot hear. But the two big ones were simplifying the universe, which is just fucking A. Like it's part of the sales pitch is interconnected. Everything's really complicated. And this is 20 years after Marvel had been publishing. Marvel wasn't fucking simple either at that point. Come the hell on. So it's supposed to simplify the universe, and it's also supposed to bring a lot of our extremely powerful characters down to what I will call a Marvel level, right? And Superman was definitely one of these. Now, do I think that's necessary? No. And it's a stupid fucking conversation from jump. You don't beat Marvel by doing Marvel shit. You lean into the stuff that makes you different, which I feel very strongly is what JLA is doing here. Like it leans into that sense of scale and mythology and gravitas I mean, there is some of that mythology and gravitas now to an extent at Marvel because it's been so long, but even so, we don't think of those characters in the same kind of really broad archetypal terms that we can with like Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, things like that.
Right.
So this is DC once again sort of leaning into the problem. And I think Sims talks about the other problem, capital T, capital O, capital P, which is they're never going to be as good at being Marvel as Marvel is. So what are you doing? Right. Are there ebbs and flows of power level? Sure. Does this really matter in the broad scheme? Not really. It's just like a kind of wrong-headed business because this is the other thing that I think this is speaking to is that you have a lot of writers who say, man, Superman's really hard to write. No, he isn't. You just want lifting heavy shit and bullets bouncing off of him to be his biggest problems. That's dumb as shit. He's amazing at those things. That's not where you poke him.
Right.
But because you have a lot of really legitimately unimaginative professionals when it comes to Superman, that's what they say. So there's often this move to, I had to bring him down a notch. No, you're just a fucking hack, I think.
Well, when he's physically that powered, though, you're right. Like you need to get him where he's vulnerable, and the only place where he's vulnerable is in his squishy little insides, like how he's feeling, what his emotions are, where his thoughts are. All of that, I think, is great. Not going to get into but I would like to just stop for a moment and just make a point for anybody listening. That is something that I asked him without putting it in the notes. He had no preparation for it. He's quoting specific people, remembering their names off the top, remembering the history. I'm just saying that if you have a con or if you have you need a panelist for anything, you need a guest on a podcast, you cannot do better than Joshua Unruh talking about comics because I've been doing this for years and I have yet to throw him off where he's like, yeah, I really don't know.
Well, I'll just sit here blushing then with
right. You can blush while I go into my my moment of what the fuck. All right. So we got a couple of things here. One of them is Coma Guy, right? Who is somebody who will be significant, is my understanding, but we have no idea who he is. But clearly, even when he's in a coma, looks evil. Like, has evil coloring. There's just evil, like, emanating from this guy that has the demons in the flowers by his bed. There's just evil there. So I don't know what's going on, but I predict evil.
Those aren't even connected, and I love that. Like, because the demons...
it's not even
because
connected.
Demons are everywhere. Remember, hell is everywhere.
Demons are everywhere. Hell is everywhere.
Yes, I'll just say this because we're going to talk about the last page of the book, right? He's the key.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
He is a well-known supervillain.
Yes.
Well, I say well-known, like a pretty strong B-lister, like JLA B-lister, you know.
Okay.
And basically, you know, no lock, no puzzle, you know, can hold him kind of thing. When last we saw him, he was going into this coma, and we're going to talk more about how this has expanded his abilities when he is the antagonist in the next two-parter. So, again, this is serial storytelling being done well. Right? Like, we're teasing the next story without taking the focus off of this story. Like, a lot of weird shit's happening. This one is a very specific brand of weird shit. Because you'll notice the doctor that's on the ground is, like, fishing his keys out of his pocket. And somebody is in the background writing, unlock, unlock, unlock on the wall. And it's because the key is having an effect on them as he leaves the hospital to go get up to his shenanigans that we'll see in the next couple issues.
Well, yeah, there's a nurse straddling what is clearly a dead man.
I think he's just really sick because I don't know why there would just be a dead guy in the hallway of the hospital.
I don't know, but regardless, it's pretty, I mean, a lot of the stuff here, you know, JLA, like, I don't know who this was, what age group at the time that this was written for. This wasn't for kids. This wasn't for like a particular, is it?
Yeah.
Because there's a nurse straddling either dead or unconscious. This man absolutely is. There is sexual assault happening like in the background of this panel that is really dark. And so for that moment, I was a little bit confused about that and like what exactly it is that we're doing, because that's a big thing to have happening in the background. And I understand that he's affecting the people around him, but that's dark. That's some dark shit. What I'm saying is that has narrative weight that feels out of place for something that is just kind of a flag in the ground for whatever's coming next.
I mean, I didn't particularly trip on it, but again, I'm ready for a lot of crazy shit to happen, and I was like, oh, the villain for next issues. Okay, cool. I mean, you know, like, I'm not saying that your reaction is incorrect. I think this is a very your mileage may vary, you know, situation. So
it may well be. Okay, so let's go to the next thing where like, and these are things that of course Joshua and I were texting back and forth because I was like, what the fuck is this? Also, I'd pay money to watch your back. Why is the quote unquote good angel sexually harassing Wonder Woman while she's trying to get her fucking work done? Why is that a thing? And nobody's smacking him in the face. Nobody's calling it out. Wonder Woman is just putting up with it.
Yeah.
What the actual fuck with that?
So if I were to read this in the most charitable way, I am reminded of a thing that Claremont did when he was writing the X-Men. And there was this time early on when like every noble villain, you know, every villain but one with a code of honor, you know, kind of thing, would fall in love with Storm. Like every one of them. Like Dr. Doom did it. Magneto thought about it. Fucking Dracula fell in love with Storm. And if I was being super charitable, I'd say, oh, that's what we're doing here with Wonder Woman. Except those guys literally fell in love with her, like sent her love poems and flowers. And sometimes they kidnapped her too, because they're villains. Like, let's not put too fine a point on it. But I mean,
yeah, they're villains. And
here's our good guy.
Narrative.
Yeah, like sexually harassing Wonder Woman at the
consequence, without so much as a raised eyebrow, while we have one female character that is a main character, aside from the nurses who are forced to, because of the influence of this key, sexually assault dead or dying people in a hallway. Like, I'm concerned about what is happening with women in this entire thing. I don't know what that's about. I don't know if there's a like wider thing, but I have huge what the fuck vibes with that. Then we get Zoriel caused all of this mayhem. Now, granted, okay, blaming the victim a little bit. Zoriel became human. He went through the proper channels. He wanted to be mortal. He came down to Earth, right? Because he had something really important to do. Really important to do. And then, of course, Asmodel follows him. There's secrets to be told, yada, yada, yada. Wants to shut him up. You know, it's basically a mob hit, right? So at the end, we discover that Zoriel asked to be human and mortal and caused all this ruckus so he could go see about a girl who does not know him, is not aware of him, is not in love with him, but he's in love with her. You know, like, I get that he didn't anticipate Asmodel coming after him. I get that he didn't anticipate that he would throw all of San Francisco into a fiery hell in the process. But narratively, when we see that all of this stuff happened because an angel wanted to go and see about a girl where he is in love with her and she doesn't know who he is, which means that he has been spying on her, involved with her in some way, watching her, stalking her in whatever way is available to angels, is now in love with this woman that he has stalked who has no knowledge of his existence whatsoever and has to come to Earth for Nookie. Like, is that what we're being given here, or am I misreading that? Once again, like the other woman that we have here has been stalked by an angel.
Okay. I don't know if this is going to make that better, but he was her guardian angel. So it's not like he was stalking her for creepy reasons. He was protecting her, and in that process, fell in love with her.
And
which
felt
also,
that it was
for what it's worth,
for him.
No, please, damn him with all of this. Please, go, yes.
Okay, and felt that it was appropriate for him to come to Earth and go to her house and tell her he loves her when she has no idea who he is, but he is still an angel. Like, he's still got a lot of power. So we're talking about an individual, a man with power, feeling entitled to a woman's attention because he likes her, even though she has no idea who he is. And what is she going to say? Oh, no, like, I'm not interested, angel who could kill me with a look? Like,
that's basically what she does say.
Well, good for her, but what the fuck? Like,
so, yeah, I do feel like there are other stories that mitigate this. One thing you and I talked about is that we wanted this big reveal in this book, right? This 1-page reveal, which definitely is not a great look for Zariel. Like, you know, even adjusting for 90s sensibilities of what was appropriate in rom-coms and such, this is not the best look. It's not, honestly, I feel like adjusting for 90s, not the worst look, which is not me defending it. I'm just saying, you sit this next to a bunch of like romantic comedies of the time and you're going to be like, yep, dudes are kind of trash. So
I can tear apart a lot of 90s romantic comedies, ones that I actually really love and enjoy.
Yeah.
With the exact same ferocity as this. So, like, I get it. Like, environmentally, we were telling a lot of these kinds of stories.
Yeah, I just want to say, culturally, not a blip at the time. Like, should it have been? Yes. I mean, that's not what I'm arguing.
Yes,
but, like, at the time, this would have fit right in. Now, the story of Zariel and this woman does get told in more detail in some other stories. And Zariel is very cognizant of the weird position he's put this woman in. She's not really interested. She has a boyfriend, if I recall correctly. It's been a while since I read all of this. But, like, she's not interested. I don't want to say it doesn't go anywhere, but I mean, like, Zariel is actually like, yeah, very respectful, you know, like, it was weird for me too. I didn't expect to fall in love with you, but again, I don't know. It is, I feel, mitigated by these other stories, making it so much less more problematic. However, that doesn't feed into this one-page reveal in JLA. That's kind of extra textual to JLA. Although, interesting question we don't have to answer now. What the hell does extra textual mean in a shared universe? Is that even a thing? I
gotta say, it's a...
You know...
it may not... it is a little bit in that the individual story that you are consuming at the time, I feel very strongly, really has a responsibility to provide you with a complete experience in that one text. And then other texts, like the series aspect of things, will then kind of play on that. But I don't think you get a pass if there's something that's not in the story. And I think that like the hit that women take overall in this issue from beginning to end is something that needs recognition. And the thing is that like when you're reading things or engaging with pop culture content, I think that it is absolutely appropriate to say, okay, for the time. But the thing is that we're reading it now. So for the time... Totally. Is not an excuse and not anything like that, which I don't think that you did. For the time, I think is an understanding that like we're not condemning these writers, artists, yada, 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 for things that they didn't know and they didn't understand. However, because we are reading it now, because we are interacting with it now, these are really important questions for us to say, hey, here's this, here's this, here's this, because not asking those questions, not acknowledging that this is really super fucked up with women, this issue with women, super fucked up. I think it's important that we ask those questions, that we acknowledge that without a big condemnation of who's at fault and why are they wrong and why are they terrible people. That is not what's going on. You know, I think it's important to acknowledge it. Does it make me angry because I'm a woman who has gotten slapped in the face through, media since the day I started looking at media? Yeah. After a while, you get real tired of it, you know? And there are things like that, you know, everybody here is white. There's no real like representation for anybody who is not white. That is also another discussion, but because it's not something I personally experience, I can acknowledge it, but I can't really speak to what that says and what that does, right? But I think that like it's really important to see it. It's important for us as readers, as critical readers of media, to see these things. But I don't think that it's something that is a condemnation necessarily of the people who wrote it, because they wrote it within a context and a culture that was not respectful of women at the time, that didn't acknowledge all of this stuff, that thought it was perfectly fine. And we have to take that into account as well, I think.
Absolutely. No argument. And if I had the opportunity, I would actually be really interested to ask Morrison about that, because they are queer. Now, them coming out as non-binary is fairly recent, but I get the feeling that they have had an awareness of themselves longer than that. And being queer doesn't magically make you not sexist or misogynist or whatever, but they do tend to be a person who gets it overall. And so and it's one thing when Green Lantern does it, right? Like we have seen this from Kyle a few times, but he always gets in trouble. Like somebody chews him out. Either Wonder Woman like stares him down, or Jean is like, Kyle, you know, like he gets a thing. So,
and that's what you need, a textual acknowledgement. I'm sorry to interrupt, but I just want to point this out and shine a light on what you just said, because it's really important. When the text acknowledges that it's not okay, we're fine. Like the fact is misogyny, sexism, racism, all of these things exist in our culture, and acknowledging that is not a bad thing at all. It's actually a good thing. However, when the text refuses, like in none of these instances does the text seem to be even remotely interested in what the fuck with Wonder Woman getting sexually harassed on the job. You know, is that supposed to be cute? It's not. You know, this woman, this high-powered, you know, like entity coming down and saying, I'm in love with you. And what is she supposed to do with that? Like that, like all of that, the ways in which women, even women that are on our team, even Wonder Woman, who should get some goddamn respect, right? None. And so I find that to be something that needs attention, because the text is not calling it out. When the text calls it out and says that's not okay, we're fine, because it's being acknowledged.
And that, I think that's the question, is that I would just be, not like a how dare you, but just a what was what was going on, right? Like personally, what was going on? Were you just kind of broing it up at the time and you've evolved since, or, not to demand explanations, but I'm legitimately curious because I know more about the creator's life. How was that impacting or not impacting here? What was going on? And they don't necessarily owe me an answer, obviously, but I would definitely have what pieces were going into this, that this is the sausage that came out, pardon the pun,
that this is what came out. Right. And to say that, like, not only does, being queer mean that you're suddenly you don't have misogynist, sexist, or like racist, whatever, ideas and beliefs in your head that you may not even be aware of. But like being a woman doesn't automatically clear me from misogyny and sexism. Like nothing does because it's in the culture, and the thing is that like it's in the culture. We learn it from day one. And the process of unlearning it is a long, tangled process that we all have to go through at some point. Like we have to unlearn these things that we've been taught to believe are true that are not true, that we've been taught to believe are acceptable and okay that are not acceptable and okay. And right now we're in that process of doing a lot of unlearning. And I mean, you can point to stuff in my books. Like the thing is, I'm not that popular an author. Nobody gives a fuck. Like there aren't enough people who give a fuck about my books to like call me to carpet on them. But like I've seen shit in my books where I'm like, oh no, Lonnie, past Lonnie. Not great. That is not great, And I recognize, and if somebody came to me and said, what the fuck with this, I would say, literally didn't know the damage I was doing. I'm unlearning everything now, and I'm moving forward, trying to do better with the work that I create. And that honestly is the only thing that anybody can do. Like everybody who has been brave enough to create within this world has probably done some harm at some point because there are things that in the culture that we're trained to believe that are just not true. So all of that said, like this is why I feel like it's really important to not condemn creators, but to have these discussions.
Yes.
And the thing is, so many people are so interested in having discussions that condemn creators rather than ask the questions about the creators are a mirror reflecting us back at ourselves. The problem is not Grant Morrison. The problem is us. So we're taking a look at us. What I am critiquing is us, is the culture that I was participant in at this time as well. So I think we need to learn to like separate that stuff out. And yes, do I get angry? Do I get like, what the fuck with this? Yes, because I'm so tired. Because as a woman, I am so tired of taking these slaps all the time. And I used to take them willingly back in the day because I didn't know that these things were not true, that I didn't deserve them somehow. And it's taken me a long time to get there. So yeah, it's frustrating for people who are affected by the particular slings and arrows that come at us through our media. But the condemnation of creators is something that I am adamantly against in media. Like, and you're talking about the stuff that they created, things that somebody might do it like as a human being with a lot of power because they have a lot of media and stuff behind them, things that they say as themselves, that I think we need to definitely do cultural critiques of that and hold people accountable. Yeah. That's a whole different thing. But I think that we get into this space where we have a lot of conversations about art versus the artist and yada, yada, yada. And this is not that. Grant Morrison, to my knowledge, has done nothing in their personal life that requires any accountability or anything. And I don't think that this requires accountability. I think that this requires us as readers, when we engage with material, to ask the question.
I absolutely agree. That's why. And the reason that I would love to ask Morrison about this, again, because I know a little bit about their life, but also because when I was buying this, in as much as I was political at all, I was a right-wing shithead. So, like, all fingers point back here as far as were you kind of a shit show of a human being politically. And I put sexism, misogyny, and all that under the umbrella of politics because I'm not talking about partisan things. I'm talking about the disposition of power, right? Everything is political because it's always about the disposition of power, not because of your partisan bullshit. Okay. So I say that to say, like, I have had a massive transformation literally since I was reading this very book. So I'm just like, what's been going on? Like, what happened? Did it not even blip? Or like I said, did you make the joke knowingly and it just lands different now than you did at the time? I just have questions, partly as a creator, partly as a fan, partly as a person who's been on their own journey since this time. So yeah. I am with you on all of that. If we have dealt with your moments of what the fuckery,
Yes.
there's like one more Superman bit that is there's a moment in this story that really got my attention because I think a lot about the Jewish roots of Superman. Now, I am not Jewish. However, for a variety of reasons, my own faith tradition, other things that I worked on, wanting to know the history of the creators that made my favorite characters. Because of all those things, I have kind of what I'd like to think is a handle, the beginnings of a good handle from an outsider's perspective, right?
Yeah.
So the scene in this that really got my attention is Superman wrestles an angel and he doesn't win. He wrestles the angel to a standstill, right? It's Flash and Green Lantern that win the day. But in the process of that, there's Superman wrestling an angel, which, by the way, why are you confused that he's withstanding the light of heaven? He is one of the purest souls. Come on, he's a really good guy. But the reason that the wrestling an angel really got my attention and made me think of these extremely Jewish roots of Superman is that, depending on your translation of the Tanakh, of the Old Testament, Jacob's either wrestling God or an angel. I mean, it's pretty clear to me that it's wrestling God, but a lot of times this gets turned into some kind of, messenger, a stand-in for God. And Jacob doesn't win either, but he also doesn't lose. And in fact, that is when Jacob's name is changed to Israel, which will be the name of my people. I struggle with God, is the way that I've heard that translated. Okay, so the that's the foundational myth, like of the people. The first time that they as a people got that name, it's because one of their patriarchs wrestled God to a standstill. And here we have Superman, who originally an extremely Jewish character that has, just by the nature of who's been writing them over the decades, that comics in general and superhero comics in specific were extremely Jewish owned and driven in their earliest inceptions. Like almost any of the names that you can imagine from the beginning, these are Jewish men. Jack Kirby's real name is Jacob Kurtzberg. Stan Lee's real name is Stanley Leibowitz. Just you start to name them, it's very Jewish fueled. And so you had Siegel and Schuster creating a very Jewish approach to Superman that has then, by the nature of who's written them since, kind of got Christianized pretty heavily. Superman gets like set into a Jesus or a science Jesus role a lot. And sometimes it works great, and a lot of times it's just hollow as shit. But I really had this moment where I was like, yeah, there's some of that Jewishness, that has been lost on purpose or by accident, just by the ebb and flow of the story. I was like, that's an extremely Jewish picture of Superman right there as he wrestles an angel to a standstill. It's pretty great. I like that a lot.
I love that.
Speaking of Jewishness, because this is probably going to come up in this, I feel like you have some questions or concerns about angels in general that I might be able to address to some extent.
I would love to hear all of your thoughts about that, because yes, like angels and demons in a superhero universe do feel a little at odds for me, but I think it's because the superhero universe is so much broader than even the experience that I've had with it. And understanding that it is like the big tent of genres. Like you can pretty much almost do anything in a superhero, right? So how do we end up with angels and demons as part of this storytelling?
Well, I think we talked a little bit about this last time, but like making a superhero angel is not on paper, like if you flatten it out, it's not much different than Wonder Woman being empowered by Greek gods, or Thor being a space alien that inspired worship of Norse gods, and sometimes actually being a god. Like that has shifted at Marvel, over time. So like if you flatten it out, I don't think there's a lot of difference there. The difference that I think comes in is that angels and demons are still part of two actually still heavily believed in religions, like active religions in at least most flavors of Christianity and Islam, right? The Jewish angle is a little different and is kind of interesting to me because there are Jewish demons. And also let me just preface, I am not an expert on any of this, but I am a very interested amateur. Okay. So like you said at the beginning, not all angels are good angels was super obvious like exposition. Is it though? Because isn't a bad angel just a demon? You know, is
that what it is? But like the idea that all angels are good is fairly simplistic, and that all demons are bad is fairly simplistic. And in a lot of storytelling, like, you know, of course I did a podcast series on both Buffy the Vampire Slayer and the Angel series that came out that's still pretty and still dead. So I've been talking about demons as necessarily evil for a while, and we do have demon characters in that universe that are not bad. You know, some of them are good, you know, like just because you're a demon doesn't mean that you're evil. Just because you're an angel doesn't necessarily mean that you're good. And I think that overall, but in a lot of storytelling, when we see angels are good and demons are bad. And that's just kind of how we swap it up. But what I was talking about with the obvious is that here we have Asmodel tearing shit up as an angel. So like when you have something over the visual of an angel just, you know, destroying the place, not all angels are good, I felt like was we get it.
Okay, so from a really Christian perspective, if you're an angel who rebelled in Lucifer's rebellion, then you're a demon. Like that's what the big difference is. But the thing is, almost all of that is extra biblical. Like it's a folklore about Lucifer, about Satan. Well, less about Lucifer and more about Satan. Lucifer is a very Christian concept. Satan as an opposite number to God is, as opposed to a functionary in God's court, which is how most of the Tanakh deals with the Satan. The idea that that's the focal point was really like a folklore, a cultural belief that grew up during the intertestamental period, in between the closing of the Jewish canon and the opening of the Christian canon. That's not a very long time. It's a few hundred years. But in that time, this like real fascination with like dark powers in the world, and that there is a leader of them who stands up in opposition to God, that's new. Like that's relatively new. And I can say that because I've had a little education on Jewish demons, which I don't even like using the phrase Jewish demons because the dark spirits in Judaism they have different origins, they have different purposes. None of them are good, but not all of them are like slavering over the things evil either, you know. So they're shadim. Shadim are how they're referred to. So I'm probably going to say that because saying demon like gives a connotation to those of us that grew up in at least a background culturally Christian perspective.
Yes.
So like that's new and not mostly in either of the sets of sacred texts. Like there's a lot of reading in, but so if you go at it from sort of a synthesis kind of idea that you have angels, supernatural creatures created by God to serve God, and you have shadim who are either were meant to be there's a few different like ways that they came to being. So either they are a lesson to all of us that the work is not just put aside on the Sabbath, it's actually done. Whether it's done or not, it's done, right? Because one of the stories is that Hashem that God did not create bodies for them in time for the first Sabbath, and then just went, you're done now. It's fine. That the work is finished, and they don't love it. That's one thing. Another perspective is that ties shadim into rebellion also, in that Adam had a wife before Eve named Lilith, and she rebelled. Yes. She did not accept her place in a hierarchical situation. And when she departed the garden, something fundamentally changed about her, and she became a Shadim and then gives birth to 1,000 Shadim a day, something like this. Like, it's crazy. Like, so there's just different ways that you get them, and one of them does have to do with rebellion against God's order, but it's not the same as an angel figure who says, no, I think I can be like God, and stages a rebellion and falls. And so if you kind of do a syncretic version of this, like between Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, I think you can get to a place where there's angels that are good and they do the thing that God wants them to do, and there are angels that are bad, but that usually means that they're rebelling, which holds true with Asmodel here. And then there is a group of spirits that are the equal but opposite number to the angels, that are bad, ranging from bad to evil, that were either created that way or birthed that way, but were not strictly part of the original created order. Again, that's a real broad brush. I'm not an expert. I'm just a very interested observer. But it does it. And what I appreciate about this is, I think you and I talked about this off mic a little bit, is that you can bring any genre or any folklore or any mythology into a superhero universe, but by nature of making it part of the superhero universe, like a whole bunch of nuance just gets scraped off along the way, right? Anything will fit in the superhero universe, but the edges got to be rounded for that to happen. So like your average Norse person would look at our picture of Thor and be like, I'm sorry, the fuck what? Right? And honestly, same thing for any classical Greek that saw how we treated the Olympians when it came to, things like Wonder Woman, right? Like, it just scrapes the nuance off. So they're not those things, but they are also clearly not exactly those things. And I think that's what happened here. It only stings a little, or gets our attention a little, because these are concepts that are like actively believed in by large swaths of people right now. So it feels different culturally. But what I really like about the experiment is it works. It fucking works. Like, we can climb into some of this other bigger questions about angels and demons and Shadim and stuff like that. And it's interesting, but you don't actually need it. The superhero shit still works.
Yes, absolutely. But I do love that like extra textual sort of context for all of that. And once again, I cannot recommend enough inviting Joshua Unruh to your con or panel or whatever it is that you need, because all of that was not in the notes. He just did it. So
I was a little more prepared for that one, but also I knew we would probably have that conversation, but also in really all this other information that I shared there is stuff that I have just gleaned along the way, either working through things in my own tradition or learning more about Judaism as a whole and how that impacts my tradition. So if anybody heard anything wrong there, you can actually at me on that one. Anything I've said before that one, fucking lump it. I don't care. I'm right, you're wrong, whatever. But in that space, if you've got some big thoughts and feelings on that, and I'll do one more podcast shout out. I actually learned almost everything. I've read other sources since then, but my education on Shadim started with a podcast that sadly has not been updated in a while, but has a bunch of episodes you can go listen, called Throwing Shade. That is about the Shadim. Great stuff. Go listen to that if you're curious about Jewish demonology from somebody who is, in fact, an expert. We are entering now the portion of the show where we talk about our various and sundry favorite parts. And let's kick it off with favorite art. I have already telegraphed my own personal favorite. I love the big ass page where Superman is wrestling an angel. Partly because of everything I've mentioned before, but also because Wally stands there and goes, and this is the guy who was worried he wasn't going to live up to his myth. And that's funny.
It is absolutely a really, really great moment. I have to say, for me, like, there's so much fantastic art. And again, when you're choosing favorite art from anything that Porter has done, it is an embarrassment of riches. But there was this one panel on the page, they're battling Asmodel. There's all this stuff going on. And then they have like the vibrations are going off or whatever. And in this one panel, everybody is blurred. And for a moment, I was like, okay, wait, is that me? Like, I'm old. My eyes are going a little bit. Maybe it's me. But then I see, of course, that the speech bubbles are perfectly clear. And there is something about the representation of these vibrations kind of hitting them that I really loved. And that was just art that I was not expecting and was really cool.
Oh, yeah. It's kind of early Photoshop. You know?
Yeah, it does feel like that.
And I'm good with it. But because that's actually, comic book art has gotten really complicated these days, both at the illustration and coloring level, and not always in ways that I think serve us largely.
Yeah.
That's a much bigger conversation. But I do like a little bit of liberal use of, you know, that kind of thing to get effects that you just literally could not have done with your pencil, you know, a handful of years before that, you know. How about your favorite story part, Lonnie? What do you love most about this story? And everybody just buckle up. I already know the answer and it disappoints me to no end, honestly, but like it's good. And I'll explain. What's your favorite story?
All right. You can be disappointed, but it's fine. Like I have to say, it's whatever unholy darkness is going on with Coma Guy, who interrupts Green Arrow's inauguration in the epilogue. Like I have no idea what's going on with that, but I think I'm most interested in this whole story with these angels and everything, because it's something that is like, it's not entirely subtle because of what he does to the people around him when he wakes up, but there's something about that I feel really intrigued by. And like, I want to know more about that guy and the angels and the, you know, all of the wild stuff that's going on around it just does not interest me as much.
That's why it's a little disappointing. You're already focused on the next story when I'm like, but look at all this cool shit. But if it's cool shit that doesn't hit you where you're living, then, you know.
Yeah.
I get it. But it's just like, look at all this cool shit. But the next story, also full of cool shit. So, okay.
Right.
Okay. My personal favorite story moment was Neron, one of the lords of hell, demanding what power on Earth could possibly restore the moon to its orbit. Flip a page. Oh, it's Superman.
Right.
Yeah, seems legit. Seems reasonable.
Seems legit.
Maybe like an answer he could have come to him on his own. I'm just saying, Neron, you know who you're dealing with.
Well, possibly. You know, the demons in this are very interesting too, because they are kind of like a side plot. Like they don't directly interact aside from pulling the moon down, right? They feel a little bit kind of like Shakespeare's fairies, you know, in Midsummer Night's Dream. Like they feel like they're out there kind of like adding to the chaos that already exists, but not terribly interested in it. And I think that's kind of a fun little thing. So I like that too. I think that's good. But yeah, I'm definitely interested in the next thing. And I imagine at some point in the future, we will be reading that.
But unfortunately, that won't be next week, Lonnie. Please tell us a little about what we'll be covering in our next episode of In the Gutter.
All right. We will be back next week with Captain America #8, The Winter Soldier Part 1, in which a couple of flashbacks fill in what Bucky has been up to as the Winter Soldier for the last 60 years, and Steve takes it poorly. Until then, why can't we all just be nice and have babies?
Thanks for listening to In the Gutter with Joshua Unruh and Lonnie Diane Rich. If you enjoyed this podcast, please consider talking about it with your friends, leaving a review somewhere, or supporting Chipperish Media, patreon.com/Chipperish.